So welcome to the Stress Awareness webinar. For those of you that just joined, my name is Melissa. I am the business psychologist here at Thrive. Today's session is about stress. So we're going to be looking at what stress is, some of the common signs of stress and why it may be hard to switch off and the importance of actually switching off. Please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function. I will try and keep an eye on that and answer questions as we can. The second half of today's session is going to be delivered by my colleague Dale, who's going to be talking about the Thrive app. So hope you guys enjoy. So there is just a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to have a look at those quickly. Good morning to everybody. Okay, so firstly then, why should we be talking about stress? So if we look at the statistics that are currently showing on the screen, 51% of all work-related ill cases resulted in either stress, depression or anxiety. And as a result of that, 55% of working days have been lost due to work-related ill health. So the numbers are quite big, okay? And if we can imagine, obviously with like the pandemic and things like that have happened over the past year or two, these things are obviously growing, and the prevalence of work-related stress is really, really important. So this is kind of why we're talking about it now and trying to increase our awareness of the subject. So what actually is stress? Stress is a physical response to an external stimuli, okay? So essentially almost like a threat or perceived danger. So what our body does when it feels stressed is it goes into what is commonly known as the flight or fight response. And this is a physiological reaction that the body does essentially to protect itself from any kind of threat. So if we think about when if we go back sort of like a million years ago or so, stress has evolved to save our lives. So if we think about when animals roamed the world and we lived in like villages and things like that, the body would go into this kind of like fight or flight response in order to protect itself because of that perceived danger. So it could be a saber-toothed tiger, for example, or you know, a threat from another village or something like that. But these kind of reactions is what's evolved within humans over time in order for them really to survive. So the problem is that we no longer live in forests with wild animals anymore, but we are still hardwired to look out for constant danger and be ready to flight or run at any moment. So this is perfectly normal and can be an important reaction in certain situations, but it has evolved in modern times to occur in instances which aren't immediately life-threatening. So for example, things where you may be delivering a pitch, or you've just missed a bus, or you've got to like meet a deadline, for example. The fact that we physically respond to these pressures in the same way as though we were under threat from a predator can also result in actually quite high stress. So we all have different certain levels of certain thresholds of stress levels. And these can vary between from one person to another. So the level is not fixed, and this can change as we are exposed to different life stresses. So if we think about the first time that we try to drive a car, for example, you would get into the car and you'd be quite nervous and quite stressed because you've got to think about you know, getting it into gear, checking your mirrors, finding your bike, thinking about other motorists and things like that. But as over time, as you actually do those things, it becomes almost like second nature to you. So that stress actually reduces itself. What's important though is that stress can vary between individuals, but dependent on how they perceive a situation. So the concept of subject perception is really important when it comes to learning how to manage stress more effectively. So it's important that chronic stress can lead to physical symptoms. So if our bodies are constantly in in stress all the time, we're unable to cope. So our bodies are designed to cope with short-term acute stress, but we're unable to be in a stressful state consistently all the while. So if we're experiencing stress constantly, but we're not actually physically running away from anything, this can cause our bodies to be in a stress state and never actually come back down to normal. This can actually have a detrimental effect to the body and can cause things like heart attacks, cancer, aneurysms. So it's quite important that the body is able to complete what is known as a stress cycle. Now, this is broken down into 3 stages: resistance, exhaustion, and alarm. So alarm is the initial state of when that stress begins. Resistance is what happens in the middle, and then exhaustion is what happens at the end. So our body goes through this stage, and it actually helps us to be able to alleviate stress. For anybody that is interested in learning a little bit more about the stress cycle, there is a book by Emily and Amelia Nagoski, and it's called Burnout. So if you are interested in that, then by all means, please look that book up. Sometimes physical symptoms can precede psychological ones. So this is our body's way of telling us that something needs to change. So being aware of these symptoms can help you to identify if you may be affected by stress and even burnout. So if you notice any of these symptoms, it's really important to actually, make sure that you do something to put some prevention in place and to take some care. So if we think about Usain Bolt, for example, fastest man on 2 legs. Imagine your body being in that constant state of being that fast all the time. So imagine how fast Usain Bolt runs. Imagine being like that all the time. Our body just would not be able to cope with it. And this is where we get those then physical symptoms of feeling sick or muscle tension, digestive issues. We're unable to relax. We're unable to sleep. But as well as the physical issues, there's also psychological issues as well. So if we think that stress can cause irritability, aggression, loss of control, insomnia, in some cases sadness, memory issues, and in some cases it can cause depression and anxiety and burnout. So burnout causes people to feel drained of energy and emotion. So people can experience feelings of hopelessness, which can lead to low mood and also feeling extremely unmotivated. Guilt is also another common feeling. The feeling of being extremely tired, having a lack of energy, and not wanting to do the things that you normally would. So not wanting to go to work, not feeling that once you are at work that you actually want to participate in anything. So these feelings often come gradually and can be a little bit hard to spot, especially at the beginning, because they build up over time. So everyday tasks at work or at home could become more difficult. So imagine if you were having to care for somebody, for example, these things might be a lot more difficult for you to manage. So people often feel negative about their tasks and have difficulty concentrating or being creative. So it's important to remember that stress will affect each person in a different way. And can be influenced by both individual and contextual factors, and looking at whether the context, for example, work demands and requirements could make a change. I'm conscious that somebody did have their hand up. Do you want to maybe take yourself off mute if you had a question? No? Okay, we'll continue. So do you think that there might be any benefits to stress in the workplace? So we've got a quick Slido poll. So if you can take out your device and just scan the QR code, and then you'll be able to go to the poll and just vote. Okay, so while the votes are going through, Parveen, you had your hand up. Oh, someone's saying that they can't unmute. Okay, there is a Q&A function. So if you want to put your questions in the Q&A function instead, I'll be able to have a look at them for you. Right, so most of you feel that there could be some benefits to stress in the workplace. So we've got 68% who say yes, 25% of you say no, and 6% of you are unsure. Okay, so just before we move on, I'm just going to quickly look at the question. So you can only see a blank screen. Okay, the only thing that I can potentially suggest, Parveen, is there could just be an issue with your connection, maybe. So I don't know if you want to maybe just try coming out of Zoom and coming back in again. Okay, so the reason that I asked that question is with regards to what you can see on the screen now. So this is the Dogson's curve of optimum levels of arousal, and it can be used to explain how stress can have both a positive and negative effect on individuals. So the model suggests that our performance or effectiveness increases with physiological and mental arousal, but this only works to a point. So when arousal levels are too high or too low, performance decreases. So in the case of levels being too high, this leads to us feeling stressed, and if left unmanaged, can be damaging to our mental and physical health as we become chronically stressed. So just to give a sort of example and put this into some form of perspective then. If you were given a deadline of, say, a month where you had to produce a report at work, for some people, at the very beginning of that report, you may feel quite no stress, you may feel no resilience or anything like that, and actually you might be quite unstimulated for the particular report that you've got to write. But as those 4 weeks kind of start to move forward, you will, as the time gets closer, you'll start to actually become more productive and more motivated. So your stress levels will start to rise, but they won't go to a point where you're actually feeling overly stressed and can't focus. They'll get to a point where it actually gives you that extra bit of productivity and motivation in order for you to be able to write that report. If, however, you were to leave it in completely to the last minute, for some people, this might then cause you to then dip, and actually you're unable to focus because you're feeling really stressed, you've got this report to write, and it's, you've only got maybe a day or two in order to kind of do that. So that's just to give you an idea of how stress can actually be useful. It's also worth pointing out that this isn't the right, no right formula for everyone. And it's individual differences which will dictate when our concentration and arousal is highest. So self-awareness of our own preferences can really help us in managing how we work within these processes. So it's worth also noting that because we all have our own optimum working peaks, that we may peak at different times. So for some people, it could be closer to the beginning. For some people, it's in the middle, and for some people, it's at the end. So it's very important that the amount of stress we feel as individuals in any given situation is unique to us all. And just because we might be more stressed than others does not mean that we are any less capable than them. Everyone lives their lives quite differently, and experiences will determine your thresholds and performance curves and levels of resilience. So it's just worth to kind of like make a note of that. So when we think about resilience, everybody has their own way of coping with things, okay? And we all struggle sometimes with switching our minds off. So a lot of people are worried about things, financial things, especially at the moment. And it's easy to kind of get consumed by thoughts and worries about future events or replay bad experiences over in your head. So switching off is about being able to focus on something neutral and at least be away from anything that's causing you to feel stressed or worried or down. So for example, if you think about being able to stop thinking about work after you've finished work and actually not start thinking about it again until the next day. So for some people, that can be quite easy. For other people, it can be actually quite difficult. So the whole point of neutral thought is that we're not thinking about anything other than what's here and now. So essentially, being able to switch off is about just kind of like being in the presence almost. It's about being in that present moment. So, and just fully immersing yourself in whatever it is that you are doing. So for example, if you are at the dinner table and you've just finished, you're just about to have your dinner, rather than sitting and thinking about a meeting that you've got tomorrow or something that you did at work, if you are being present within that moment, you're thinking about the food. So you're thinking about the smells, the taste. Are you having wine? Are you having water? What's the conversation like if you're having dinner with somebody? So it's about just actually focusing on the here and now, and leaving those other thoughts to another day. So it's not to say that you shouldn't ever think about anything other than what you are specifically doing at this precise moment in time, but it's really good to kind of get into the routine of being able to switch off on those things and just be present in whatever it is that you are doing at that moment. So it's important to say that when we talk about switching off, like I say, it's not about ignoring things. So naturally, there will always be things that we need to think or worry about. But the point is being able to have an element of cognitive control over when and where and for how long you actually do think of those things, so they're not actually impacting aspects of your day. So you're able to kind of get on and do other stuff without thinking about things too far in the future or too far in the past. There's a couple of questions. Somebody's just said, I recently just started my role. I love the company culture and the team. The client is also great, but I'm not sure why I am not very enthusiastic at work. I feel a bit bored when there's nothing to do, and burnt out when there is too much to do. How can I remain motivated and find balance? Okay, so that's a great question. What I would advise is that, you're saying that the client is great, but sometimes you're a little bit bored and you're not necessarily enthusiastic about your work. So is it the work that's the issue, or is there some other personal things in there that may be an issue too? So maybe think about writing down the demands of your work. So what aspects of the job do you like? What is it that's boring? So maybe give yourself a visual representation of what those things are. Are you doing anything outside of work? So it could be that you may not be feeling motivated because you're not necessarily doing anything else. And so having some other activities that you could do may be a way of adding some motivation potentially into work or into other aspects of your life as well. So, sometimes it's difficult to kind of remain motivated and to try and find balance. And there's no, one size doesn't fit all. It's about kind of trying different things to kind of make you feel motivated. So have a think about what it is that you really, really like about your job, and maybe what it is that you don't necessarily like about that, and have a look at what resources you have within your role. So when you are bored, what is it that's actually keeping you bored? What is it that you could potentially do to add some, have a chat with your manager maybe and be like, well, I think I could do this or add this into my role to make it that little bit more interesting. So I hope that's answered your question. So for some people, it's actually quite hard to switch off. So sometimes it's asking you question, do we actually really want to relax? And for some people that may sound like a silly question, but some people have a natural resistance to relaxing. So we think, oh, if we relax, how are we going to get anything done, for example? So stress can actually be, for some people, a way of life. So many people can achieve great things in their life and career by operating on dangerously high levels of stress. So rather than winding down, we prefer to distract ourselves with something stimulating. So we tend to kind of squeeze the adrenal glands just in case something goes wrong and we can't control it. So we are trying to relax while we're trying to control everything. And this way, it's impossible to switch off. So we need to accept that we can't control everything and that it's okay. And we can take time and practice to fully understand and accept that. Some people will stay tight as a way of blocking their inner feelings. So for some people, relaxing will actually bring up negative emotions. So instead of relaxing, they continue to kind of stay tight in order to, it's almost like a coping mechanism, really, a strategy to escape from their own reality. So it's a way to avoid those negative feelings, and they prefer to focus on something that's a bit different instead. So that's the main, and that will then obviously cause additional stress. For some people, they can be chemically addicted to stress. And so stress can give people adrenaline, and that actually acts like an amphetamine, and people can get hooked on that feeling. So it's a little bit like when you go to the gym and you release those endorphins. Stress also releases endorphins in the body, but obviously it's not actually in a good way if you're going to be in that constant state all the time. So again, it's about being able to kind of just relax and withdraw. An example of that is being a super parent, for example, that even if you feel exhausted by the end of the day, you may also feel awful and not yourself if you relax and go into withdrawal mode. For some people, they're also unfamiliar with relaxation. So our minds wander amid pleasant thoughts, or we mentally disconnect and drift towards sleep and nothing else seems to matter. So sometimes people are struggling to relax because they don't know what to aim for. So many people only think of relaxation as the absence of pain, for example. So relaxation is much more of a positive state. So if we know what relaxation feels like and we are mentally alert, then we can reach this state of mind more quickly and at any given point of time. So that's the reason why many people use meditation and other relaxation techniques to relax. Okay, we've just got another question in. Can you please expand on blocking feelings? Is this things like procrastination or more like external influences like alcohol? The answer to that is both, really, because, again, it's all varies dependent upon the individual, but it can be things like stopping yourself from doing stuff, or it could be using alcohol as a way to block out, because if you're drinking alcohol, it's not necessarily the greatest way to kind of relax if you're using that as a tool to rely on and relax all the time. So it can be a manner of things. For some people, being in that state of relaxation and switching off can sometimes make their mind go to those thoughts or those feelings that they don't want to deal with. And it could be because you're going through something specific in life, maybe. And so that sitting down is going to make you face some of those feelings and some of those emotions that may come up for you. And so people just escape them. They don't really want to have to deal with those things head on. Okay, so if you are finding that you are prone to worry a lot and that sometimes even if your worries get in the way, this is a great exercise that can kind of help get through some of that worry and hopefully alleviate some of that stress. So if you allocate yourself no more than 30 minutes to go through what we call a worry list. So schedule regular times for worrying, okay? And then write down your worries and your tasks. So if you do this, and it doesn't need to be done, it can be done on a daily basis, for example, but do it somewhere where you don't tend to necessarily relax as such. So take your physical self away from where you would relax, say in the bedroom or somewhere like that, and maybe sit at the kitchen table, for example. Allocate your time. So within that time, you're going to write down all the tasks that you've got to do, any worries that you potentially have. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're essentially relieving yourself of that stress, because a lot of these things that you're writing down and that you're thinking about, they're constantly going around and around in your mind. And what you need to do is just get them out. Sometimes, if you've got nobody to speak to, that is the best way to kind of just get those things down. Once they're written down, you have a visual representation of what these worries or these tasks might look like. And actually, when you then go through that list, you might think, oh, actually, that's not really a worry. Let me get rid of that off the list. Oh, I did that yesterday. Why is it even on here? Let me get rid of that. Can't deal with that until next week. So that's no longer a worry because I've now set, an intention for that particular task or for that particular worry. So you then be able to manage those things a little bit more effectively. And actually what happens is that stress, then starts to kind of like reduce. So you're eventually alleviating that. Keep a mood journal. Now, journaling isn't for everybody, but it's another great way to kind of like release some of those thoughts and some of those worries. So you can keep a mood journal on a daily basis where you just write down your moods of how you're feeling every day. But there could be, I'm feeling, really sad today, for example, because I've just got, an unexpected bill through the door. But you're able to kind of like get those things out rather than kind of keeping them in your mind. some people, you know, do quite like journaling. For other people, it's something that it's new, it's quite new to them, and so they can find it quite difficult. But it is another great way of being able to kind of visualize some of those worries and visualize some of those moods. And if you're noticing that there's a trend of low moods and stress and worry consistently, then it's going to alert you that actually there's a little bit of an issue here. I need to kind of really look at this and maybe go and speak to your GP or speak to a friend or a family member or something like that. I've got another question. How do we get over the addiction to stress? I can see myself keep going down to the negative mode just because of very silly things, even when I see the positive sides of this situation. It takes a long time. It can take some time, and it's about being patient with yourself, and it's also about being consistent as well. So when you're saying that you're addicted to stress, is it just a particular stressful situation, or are you making situations extremely stressful when potentially they don't need to be? So as a start, maybe try this task that I've just spoke about in terms of being able to sort of reduce that stress a little bit. Also, try, we were talking about switching off, try making yourself become more in the present moment, and try and switch off more, which again does take a little bit of time to get used to, but consistency is the key. So it's about trying different things and seeing what will actually work for you. But also, if you feel that you are consistently, at that, if you remember the curve that I showed earlier, and you were at the bottom of that curve where you are just in chronic stress all the time, and you feel that there's no way for you to alleviate that, I would definitely go and maybe speak to your GP or something like that to try and get some additional support in that sort of area. And we have 2 more questions quickly. So, since starting a new role a few months ago, I frequently suffer from imposter syndrome and often compare myself to others. This causes me to feel stressed both inside and outside of work. Can you recommend any techniques to help with something like imposter syndrome? Yes, I could. Very, very quickly. So imposter syndrome, we do actually have a webinar on imposter syndrome. So that may be something that you could potentially come to get some more techniques and advice on that. But imposter syndrome is about listening to your thoughts and changing your thought pattern. So one quick technique that I can advise is that if you think of writing down the situation, so whatever that situation is, what that initial thought is, potentially that thought may well be a negative thought, and what you're aiming for is to write a new thought that could deal with that particular situation that isn't actually negative. So it's about writing those things down and changing that negative thought into a bit more of a positive thought, and what that outcome of that thought would be, and what the outcome of that situation would be. So that is one sort of way in which you could potentially look at imposter syndrome in that way. And some supplements are hailed as stress cures. What do you think about these? I think that's a really, it's an individual thing. I take supplements personally, and I think that, they can help, but I would maybe just go to a health shop and have a think about those sorts of things and just see again, it's trial and error. It's about what you would like to do personally for yourself. And then I've started to roll not that long ago, and I learned a lot, but still need a lot of training. How can I make myself feel satisfied and allow myself to make mistakes and enjoy learning from zero when my colleagues have the knowledge and experience compared to me? Okay, so in terms of starting a new job, these things are always going to happen. So just give yourself some time, because, when you're starting a new job, no one is going to expect you to know absolutely everything. So don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. Ask as many questions as you possibly can. Hopefully you may have a buddy, or you may have a colleague that you can maybe turn to, that you can ask questions to. Also go to your line manager as well, and just share some of those concerns. But just the most important thing is, when you're starting a new job, you're going to have to learn new things. That's comes part and parcel of starting a new role. So give yourself time, don't put too much pressure on yourself, and I'm sure you'll excel in the job that you have decided to do. Okay, so we've got a couple more slides before Dale does his part. So just to kind of go through then mindfulness. Okay, so worrying often relates to future events. So that's where mindfulness can be incredibly helpful. So it can really help us to focus on the present. So mindfulness is essentially attention control. So it's a mental skill that helps to maintain a degree of control about what we think. So again, going back to the example that I shared earlier about sitting down and having dinner, it's about being mindful within that moment. So paying attention, and a way to practice mindfulness is to maybe go into a room, and if you work from home, try a room that you don't work from, and go into that room and sit in there for 5 minutes and just relax. Look around, have a think about, the things that you see, what's on the wall, what's on the floor, what's around you. And then just maybe close your eyes and then relay back the things that you can see. And just practice doing that 5 minutes a day. And that will try and help you to kind of get into that mindful state of mind. Other sort of mindfulness things are exercising, meditating, doing yoga, cooking. Essentially, mindfulness can be an activity or period of time where you are entirely present and not thinking about anything else unrelated to the situation that you're in now. Communication is also a really big one. So communicate, speak to your colleagues, to friends, to family. If you belong to maybe a sports club or a social club or something like that, talk with the people that are around you, the people that you feel comfortable with. But it's really important to communicate and get those feelings out, essentially, is the main takeaway from that, I would say. And then finally, physical exercise. So when we think about physical exercise, this is a really good way to help you kind of switch off. I would recommend, if you are doing any form of exercise, and if you do like, say, high intensity workouts, for example, try to make sure that you don't do those too close to bedtime, because that can actually act as a stimulant and kind of keep you even more and more awake. But exercise is a really good way to switch off, whether you're playing something like tennis or football, or so like a sports kind of a team game, or if you're going to the gym, swimming, cycling, doing yoga. All of these things are a really, really, really good way for you to switch off, going for walks and things like that. And it enables you to release those endorphins, so you're actually releasing some of that stress out of your body, and you're not thinking about what you did yesterday or what you've got to do tomorrow. You're just focused on winning the football game, or doing a longer walk than you did yesterday. So you're focusing on that present moment. So before I hand over to Dale, there's a couple more questions, so I'll quickly go to those, and then I'll be handing over to Dale. Is stress connected to PTSD? I have been diagnosed as PTSD and feel really stressed, anxious and depressed. Is there anything I can do to de-stress? I am hyper vigilant at the moment. Okay, so PTSD obviously can have some links to stress and also to anxiety as well. So I don't know, obviously I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what your GP would have suggested to you in the first place, but I would definitely, with PTSD, I would probably start working firstly on some of reducing some stress and reducing some anxiety. So have a think about some of the mindfulness that we spoke about today, and in ways in which you can kind of calm yourself down a little bit. Because obviously with PTSD, this can last for, sometimes some long lengths of time. So it's about focusing maybe just on one thing at a time. And some of those things will then, help you kind of like move forward. I don't know if you take medication or anything like that. That's also another option as well. But, I would go with whatever it is that makes you feel sort of like better, but definitely try and do some mindfulness exercises to help reduce some of that anxiousness and some of that, the feelings of being stressed. And then finally, we've got a question from Mark. Are we going to get a PDF document on this, like a copy of this PowerPoint presentation or something? That's a great question, Mark. We don't normally send copies of these presentations and things like that out, but if you are interested in doing some full sessions with us, you know, you're more than happy to obviously contact us to be able to do something like that. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me today. I hope you really did find that useful. I will be sticking around for any further questions towards the end, but for now, I'm going to hand you over to Dale.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that.
Oh,
the nickname that my wife has for me sometimes is stress head, because I can get really stressed. Very little things, very inconsequential things, like how the dishwasher has been stacked. And so, yeah, it was really good session for me to sort of have a greater understanding around stress. And I've really enjoyed, in particular, the chat has been great. There's been some really brilliant insight shared there. In particular, I think I saw two messages which I would like to absolutely agree with, which is get a dog. Absolutely, I am fully on the bandwagon of get a dog. My dog drags me out for 2 walks a day, gives me cuddles, and definitely helps me manage my stress. Not that I've got anything against cat people whatsoever, but absolutely I back that one. Just to ensure, can people see my screen share? Has that worked? Because on my side, it says it's still loading. Okay, I will stop and try that again. Apologies. This is always the hardest part of a presentation for me, is that screen share. It can be a bit scary. There we go. It says now that I am screen sharing. Is that correct? Got some yeses and some nos. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it come through now?
Yeah, it looks as though it's come through. Everyone's sort of saying yes. So
perfect, brilliant. Perfect. It says they've got an option of 2 different screen shares. Do you want to end yours, Melissa, just to make it easy?
Gosh, yeah, sorry.
There we go. We got there in the end. Technology.
That was my fault. I do apologise.
Absolutely fine. In my role, I have to know Teams and Meet and Zoom, and there's other ones that yeah. So we'll get there in the end. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. My name is Dale, and I work for Thrive Mental Wellbeing alongside Melissa in our team here, where we are on a mission to support as many people as possible with their mental health. And in particular, obviously, this month is Stress Awareness Month, and so a very topical session for us this month in talking about stress and how we can manage it better. My role at Thrive is all around helping people understand how they get the most out of our service, from our clients who access Thrive for their service users and staff, all the way through until the end user, helping them have a great experience of our service and the vital work that we do. And what is that vital work that we do? Well, and why is it vital? Well, it's a really good question that I ask myself when I start work each day, because I'm very purpose driven in what I like to do. And in terms of the kind of role I wanted to have as a career, I wanted to be impact focused, and in particular, mental health was very important to me. And some of these stats that you can see on the screen really are that big motivator for me each day. That number one, our work is vital because the average person with a mental health condition doesn't seek help. In fact, optimistic figures suggest around 1 in 3 individuals with a mental health condition do seek help. But what that means is that at least 2/3 of individuals with a mental health condition doesn't seek help. And if we translate that into, if we were thinking about a chronic physical health condition, that would be shocking, right? We would be calling upon our public health bodies and our systems of government and hierarchies within our society to change this, to ensure that we can reach those people. But unfortunately, we're kind of coming late to the mental health conversation and recognizing the impact that it has. Thankfully, in our culture, things are starting to change. And yeah, as I said, seeing the chat today has been really inspiring to me, of how many people are switched on and really aware of some of the issues we're experiencing. But as we know, the average person with a mental health condition never seeks help for that problem. We also know that mental health is the biggest cause of workplace absence. In fact, what really shocked me was that stats from COVID suggest that there was more working days lost to mental health issues than COVID during the pandemic. And think about that. I mean, could you imagine in the bubonic plague times that the biggest cause of the loss of work was stress associated with the plague? We wouldn't have even thought of that. But we know from the absence data, from the work that's been done by the ONS and beyond, that mental health is the biggest cause of workplace absence. And we also know that mental health conditions are the fastest rising healthcare issue in the UK as well over the last decade. And why is this a problem? Well, there's some fairly obvious reasons why it's a problem, because we want people to get help. We want people to get better. We want people to live lives where well-being is important and their happiness is valued. But we also know that some of the reasons why this is happening are avoidable if we can tackle the issue more directly. And what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years in particular, as more study around mental health has come out, is that there's been a lack of innovation in the way we reach individuals with mental health support. And so even though today in my phone, I can pull up my banking app and can transfer money to my friend to pay for the football pitch we played on last night, or be able to get notifications about if I've gone into my overdraft in that banking app, be able to communicate with my brother in Canada within seconds. We, generally speaking, and especially here in the UK, the way in which we access health services, and in particular mental health services, is very traditional. It's very much requiring a self-recognition, a level of self-diagnosis to an extent to prompt that help-seeking behaviour, which causes us to question whether we're unwell enough to seek help, to question the routes to support. And actually, I think as I mentioned in the chat just now, that there is certainly struggles within the NHS in terms of waiting lists, for example, and even just opening up to that individual within a private confidential setting of a GP's office can actually be a bridge too far for many people, and something we're not quite ready to do. And this is because, number one, stigma does still persist, even if it's self-perceived stigma, where perhaps individuals think they might be judged for having a mental health condition, even if they wouldn't be in that particular scenario. The next is awareness of mental health in general, awareness of some of those typical symptoms that individuals experience, and also understanding of what support looks like and how well supported that individual would be going through these traditional routes of support. And so there's many reasons why individuals fall into this camp of the 2/3 plus of individuals who don't seek help. And really the challenge that we have taken on as an organization at Thrive is to try and solve this, because the costs for the individual and for society are significant. For that individual who doesn't seek help, the average length of a mental health condition is between 7.5 and 10 months. And that's a significant period of time for an individual to go through a really difficult process in their life of managing their mental health alongside trying to manage life, work, families, community relationships. And so for the individual, this is a really difficult time, which we feel we can help people avoid and should help people avoid. We also know that the prevalence of a mental health condition makes you more likely to have worse physical health outcomes as well. And I think I've seen a message in the chat there that sort of references things like, perhaps falling into addiction as well, and self-neglect, which can then cause a whole network of issues for that individual to have to solve as sort of relatively common attempts to self-medicate these issues. And what we do know from research is currently 1 in 4 individuals in the UK experience a mental health condition of some sort. 1 in 6 in employment experience a mental health condition of some sort. And the cost of the UK economy of this is around £56 billion per year. Just silly monopoly money that doesn't even mean anything to me as a decipherable amount. But we know that this is a significant problem for individuals having to live with these conditions and what that can mean for them, and going out into the community, families, and our employers and society as well. And so here at Thrive Mental Wellbeing, we are determined to do our best to solve this problem. In recognizing that organizations like charities, healthcare providers, and employers need services that people will actually use, that people will actually access, despite of best efforts perhaps to encourage people. We know that these traditional services aren't utilized at the rates that are high enough to really have a big impact currently. We also know that the conversation around mental health is often about firefighting. It's often about what do we do when somebody is at the point of crisis. And a lot of the interventions are usually to support somebody who is at that point of crisis. Whereas actually we haven't, as a culture, as a society, recognized that there are lines of defense that we can draw on the way. There's prevention work that we can do, which we know is successful. There's that early intervention, which stops people having to go through that long process of potentially experiencing escalating symptoms. And there's ways that we can help people access that more quickly. And what the research overwhelmingly tells us is that people want services that are accessible, easily accessible, that are proactive, that in terms of reaching out to that individual, providing that support, and that also provide the environment for that anonymity, confidentiality, and privacy, which are so important. And so here at Thrive Mental Wellbeing, as I said, we are determined to try and tackle this problem. And one way we are working on this is in webinars like these with some great like-minded people in the chat who are determined to make a difference within their sphere of influence. The other way in which, and the most predominant way which we try to do this, is through our services that we have created here at Thrive Mental Wellbeing, which we are determined to match the needs of the individual in being proactive, in being confidential, in being comprehensive, to provide coverage to everybody within defined populations of who we work with. And while you may have heard of the Thrive app, and I'm sure many people in the chat today have access to the Thrive app via an employer or via another service, we're not just the Thrive app. We are a mental health care service that uses tech as the medium to reach more people. And I've seen many apps mentioned in the chat today, which is brilliant to see that people are aware of these kind of services and how impactful they can be in bridging that chasm, bridging that gap between the individual and their needs. But we are led by consultant level psychiatrists and psychologists. We have years of clinical experience, and combining that experience with technology, as well as our own in-house research teams, engagement experts, to be able to create this experience for individuals who use our services, which allows them to have the best of both worlds of getting access to those mental health services, but in a way which works for them. And not only are we a digital, we're using that digital tech medium, but we also feel that what's really important is imbuing trust in services that we provide. Now, if you were to go into the App Store, and to be fair, the apps I've seen mentioned in the chat are all, really, in terms of the top of what we see in that digital space in terms of trust and privacy and support. But what is really important is that the individual who's using those services feels like they trust it and feel safe. And unfortunately, if you were to go into your App Store or Google Play Store and type in mental health, you would probably get tens of thousands of apps to choose from, many of which are free, and many of which are free because they sell your data, for example, in order to make it free, which doesn't fulfill those criteria of private and confidential. We're here at Thrive as a mental health care service. We are trusted by the NHS and adhere to the NHS's DTAC criteria. We're also in line with the same levels of privacy, confidentiality as the NHS, and are registered as a medical device. And so on the MHRA register for medical devices, we sit somewhere near stethoscopes and syringes. I don't know, I can't think of another device that starts with T for Thrive, but I'm sure there's people who know more about that than me in the chat. But we sit as a registered, recognized device for being able to manage mental health. And most importantly, when you use Thrive, your data belongs to you, the user. So you have the ability to control that and can actually benefit from the use of that data when you apply it in certain ways. So what I thought I would do is quickly walk you all through the Thrive mental wellbeing journey and how it works within the app, what sorts of support you can access, and ultimately what we're trying to achieve in this environment. And firstly, the first thing that Thrive is really passionate about doing is raising awareness and understanding for the user by allowing individuals access to be able to identify mental health conditions using tried and tested gold standard assessments for those conditions. We then have built a user journey which allows individuals to feel more empowered to seek help, to be able to access treatment more easily, to be able to have that environment for recovery and growth, but just as importantly, to be able to build personal resilience so that as they go forward in life, that we lower the chance of that relapse and allow them that opportunity to build up that, as Melissa was talking about, build up the ability to manage stress better and minimize the impact that stress will have on mental health. And the way that we do this within the Thrive mental wellbeing service, as I mentioned, is through screening, through those assessments. And on the screen now, we've got a short video of what one of these daily checkup assessments looks like within the Thrive mental wellbeing app, where we activate the GAD7 and PHQ9 clinical screening tools, the same ones used by your GP, same ones used by the NHS and counsellors and therapists around the world, to screen for the symptoms of anxiety or depression, and to help individuals have an understanding of the symptoms they're experiencing. I think often when we are feeling unwell, especially in regards to our mental health, sometimes the way we describe that can be maybe a four-letter word that I might not repeat in this medium. You know, we often use descriptive words rather than clinical words. And unfortunately, descriptive words don't unlock that pathway to support. So giving you that access to a clinical screening that allows you to understand the symptoms you're experiencing and use these tried and tested tools allows individuals to make more informed decisions around their mental health. Within the app, we can screen for anxiety and depression, and you've just seen those screenings now within that video. We can also screen for things like stress and resilience and the impact that stress is having in your life. And also, we can screen for vulnerability and risk factors as well. And now, there are two different versions of the Thrive Mental Wellbeing app. The first is our in-app service that also has an in-app therapy attached to it. The in-app therapy is delivered by UK-based therapists here within the UK that all adhere to UK standards in line with the NHS and in line with BACP standards for delivering counselling and psychotherapy. And what happens in this version of the app is if you screen positive for the symptoms of anxiety or depression, a member of our therapy team proactively reaches out to you, messages you within the app, onboards you into support, depending on whether your symptoms are mild or moderate to severe. If mild, then we'll support you in self-management and coaching, giving you some homework to do within the app and having regular check-ins. And for those who are perhaps experiencing more moderate or severe issues, we move you into formal therapy delivered over video and voice chat as well. We will support individuals in line with clinical need with no limits on the number of sessions we'll deliver. We're really passionate about ensuring that we bring somebody into the service and ensure they're in a better place when they leave it. And for those who don't have access to the version with in-app therapy, as I said, we have a variety of versions and a variety of different partners who have different levels of access depending on their needs. We also signpost into tried and tested support. So for example, if your employer has an EAP or if your employer has access to their own therapy service, we can signpost individuals into that following a screening, giving them that awareness and understanding that they might need some extra help and presenting all those help options to you. On top of that signposting, we also refer into the sessions we have within the Thrive Mental Wellbeing app. And these sessions include our cognitive behavioral therapy courses, our meditations and mindfulness sessions, which we've heard plenty about today, as well as other tools that can intervene in panic, stress, and anxiety. And when you do your screenings, the app will actually set you goals based on those symptoms that you're experiencing. And so if you're struggling with negative thought cycles, low mood, or anxiety, cognitive behavioral therapy will be one of the goals we set for you in our computerized CBT courses. CBT is the most commonly used form of therapy in the UK and is especially effective in managing things like anxiety. Beyond that, we'll also set you some goals that are based on symptom management. So for example, if you're experiencing a lot of stress, something like calm breathing, deep muscle relaxation sessions, self-suggestion to enable you to feel empowered to manage the symptoms while you're experiencing them as a bit of a sticking plaster to complement the CBT. And beyond that as well, we also have our mindfulness and relaxation sessions within the app, which are about training focus, controlling thoughts, and actually helping you do some of the things that Melissa was talking about today. I noticed quite a few comments in the chat were saying, you know, this is quite a difficult task to actually to be mindful and to meditate. And so the sessions in the Thrive app are about training you to be able to do this and to be able to learn how to de-stress and to control your focus and control your thoughts. And I wanted to close the session today, and we will do some questions at the end. I'm aware there may have been a few come through. I wanted to close the session today with a couple of minutes of doing some calm breathing. And this video is taken from the Thrive Mental Wellbeing app. Calm breathing is one of the best ways to manage stress. As Melissa talked about, we experience what's called the sympathetic nervous system when we get stressed. Our heart rate goes up, our blood reroutes away from the brain and the internal organs and to our major muscle groups. so that we can fight or flight our way from the saber-toothed cat back in the day, or nowadays it might, as much as we might love to punch and run with our managers if we're having a stressful meeting, I wouldn't recommend it. But what we can do is we can take control of certain aspects of that sympathetic nervous system, in particular our breathing. Heart rate is a difficult one to take control of. I'm sure there's people on the internet who claim they can manipulate their heart rate with mental energy. I'm not so sure personally, but definitely when it comes to our breathing, we can manage our breathing, which in turn brings our heart rate back down to a lower rate, lowers our blood pressure, and brings us out of that sympathetic nervous system by activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I thought I would just close the last couple of minutes of this session by leading you through a couple of minutes of calm breathing. And so I encourage you all to lower your gaze, close your eyes if you wish. If you prefer not to, feel free not to. But I'll invite you all just to participate in about a minute and a half of calm breathing before we take any final questions. So I'm gonna start now. Please, apologies if the sound goes funny. Please, somebody let me know in the chat.
It is very important to breathe deeply into your belly for this technique to work. You should see your belly raising as well as your chest while you breathe. Take a deep breath in, counting slowly to 3. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3. Hold it. 1, 2, 3. Breathe out, relaxing all the time as you go. Breathe in, 2, 3. Hold, 2, 3. Breathe out, allowing your body to relax all the time that you do it. Breathe in, 2, 3. Hold, 2, 3. Breathe out, relaxing all the time that you do it. Breathe in, 2, 3. Hold, 2, 3. Breathe out. Breathe in, 2, 3. Hold, 2, 3. Breathe out.
I'm gonna end it there, and encourage you all to if you've got access to the Thrive app and you can do this, please do. If you don't have access currently, if you can count to 3, then you can calm breathe. And so I encourage you to try this when you're feeling stressed and you feel a bit of pent up tension and frustration, to allow you just to focus on something as simple as your breath, bringing that heart rate down, activating that parasympathetic nervous system. For those who do have access to the Thrive Mental Wellbeing app currently via an employer or a charity or organisation, you can download the app within the App Store by scanning the QR code on the screen and using the access code that's correct for your organisation. And I encourage you to speak to perhaps HR or learning and development within your organisation, who will have the access code if you currently don't have access. If you are joining us today and you don't have access to the Thrive app via your employer, then I'll leave this on the screen now, which is a means of contacting us to learn more about Thrive, and so we can start working together to help you and your colleagues, or those within your sphere of influence, have access to the Thrive Mental Wellbeing resource. I'm going to quickly look in the questions and see if there's any I've missed. Let's see, we've got.
There was a question there, Dale, about there being 2 apps. I don't know if you're able just to confirm.
Yes, so we're currently going through an update of the app service, and there's a newer version which doesn't have the colon in the name, and there's an older version which does have a colon in the name. I'd recommend you download the older version, and if your access has been upgraded onto the new version, then you'll get a notification. So there's a Thrive Mental Wellbeing app with the colon, or the one from that QR code on the screen, which I'll quickly duck back to just so you can see. If you scan that QR code, that's the one I recommend. And if as soon as that update is ready to roll out to you, you'll get a notification within that version. Otherwise, I'll put that other QR code back on the screen as well. I've got a question. Do you offer DBT? I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not 100% certain of what DBT is. Perhaps Melissa might know a bit more about DBT than me.
Do we offer DBT? it would probably be something maybe that the therapy team offer, but it wouldn't be something that I would offer or something that I've seen necessarily on the app. But it would be a case of our therapy team, it might be something that they would potentially offer.
Dialectical behavioral therapy. I imagine, yeah, it would be something our therapy team would be able to offer in that therapy. Brilliant. Well, I'm just going to jump back into the chat quickly and see if there's anything else I've missed, any other questions. I think there were some questions about accessing the app, and as I said, it's usually via employer or a charity or local organisation to you. But if you don't have access, please do scan that QR code on the screen if you'd like to learn a bit more. Otherwise, just a big thank you for the huge number of people who've attended and participated today. I think it's been a great session, and big thanks to Melissa for enlightening us all on some of the techniques and things that we can do to manage our stress.
No, thank you. It was really great, really good. So thank you everyone for attending, and thanks for all the great feedback as well. Perfect.
Wonderful. Well, next month we're doing an anxiety workshop for Mental Health Awareness Week. Please do sign up, and we look forward to seeing you there.